Ayana Jackson stares at the eviction notice with trembling hands, tears threatening to fall. Behind her, Elijah waits patiently in tattered clothes, their unlikely friendship a campus scandal. Minutes later, as police drag him away calling him a trespasser, something falls from his pocket, a platinum credit card with a different name. This moment when assumptions meet shocking truth will shatter everything Ayana believes about privilege, power, and the man she's grown to love in just 3 weeks. The autumn air carried a chill that matched the cold reality of Ayana Jackson's life at Westridge University. At 22 years old, she balanced a full scholarship with the constant fear of losing it. Her dark brown fingers perpetually stained with coffee from her morning shift at the campus cafe, ink from her afternoon tutoring sessions, and cleaning solution from her evening janitorial work. Despite the exhaustion that rimmed her eyes, she maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, understanding that as one of the few black students in the economics department, she needed to be exceptional just to be considered adequate. That Tuesday morning began like any other, with Ayana rushing from her off-campus apartment, textbooks clutched to her chest, when she noticed a commotion near the student center. 2 campus security guards, both white men with stern expressions, surrounded a black man in weathered clothing. She might have walked past, already running late for her shift, but something about the scene made her pause. The man wasn't yelling or resisting, just standing quietly as one guard prodded his shoulder, saying, "We got complaints about you loitering and making students uncomfortable. You need to leave now." The man responded softly, "I was just sitting, not bothering anyone." Something in his dignity made Ayana approach despite her better judgment. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" The guards turned, surprise flickering across their faces, quickly replaced by knowing looks that made Ayana's skin crawl. One asked, "You know this guy?" The assumption that they must be connected because of their shared skin color ignited something in Ayana. "No, I don't, but I'd like to know why you're harassing someone for sitting in a public space." The guards exchanged glances before the taller one replied, "Students complained. He's not a student, not faculty, not a visitor. He's trespassing." The man finally looked up, making eye contact with Ayana. His eyes held an intelligence and quiet strength that contrasted sharply with his worn appearance. "I come here sometimes to read," he explained. "The library has books I can't access elsewhere." Before Ayana could respond, Dean Harrington approached, his tailored suit and confident stride marking his authority. "Mr. Jackson," he said to Ayana with the false warmth of someone who believed using her last name compensated for never learning to pronounce her first one correctly. "Is there a problem here?" Ayana straightened her shoulders. "Dean Harrington, I'm concerned about how this man is being treated. He's not causing any disturbance." The dean looked at the man with barely concealed disdain. "While Westridge is committed to community engagement, we must prioritize student comfort and safety." After a pause that felt deliberately intimidating, he added, "He can stay for now, but security will keep an eye on the situation." With that, he walked away, leaving the guards to follow reluctantly. When they were alone, the man looked at Ayana with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. Most people find it easier to look away. I'm Elijah." Ayana hesitated only briefly before extending her hand. "I'm Ayana. Are you hungry? I work at the cafe and can get you something." His smile revealed a small gap between his front teeth that somehow made him appear younger, more vulnerable. That would be very kind. They walked together, Ayana acutely aware of the stares they attracted. Inside the cafe, as Ayana prepared a sandwich and coffee during her break, Elijah surprised her with insightful comments about economic inequality and the history of redlining in the city's housing development. "How do you know so much about this?" she asked. "I read a lot," he answered, with a shrug that seemed to hide more than it revealed. Their conversation flowed easily, until Ayana had to return to work, but she found herself looking for him over the following days. When her roommate Taylor, a blonde business major from Connecticut, noticed Ayana bringing leftover pastries home, she questioned her. "Are you feeding that homeless guy people are talking about?" Taylor's voice dripped with judgment. "He has a name, Elijah, and he's probably more educated about economic policy than half our professors," Ayana replied defensively. Taylor rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Just be careful with people like him. They always want something. Ayana was still fuming from the conversation when she checked her university email that evening. The message from the financial aid office hit like a physical blow. Her scholarship package had been selected for review, and effective immediately, her housing stipend was reduced by 40%. The email cited budget constraints and reallocation of resources to needier students. Without that stipend, Ayana couldn't afford her rent. She stared at the screen, a cold realization washing over her that somehow this timing wasn't coincidental. It was the beginning of a pattern she would soon come to recognize, where her association with Elijah seemed to trigger institutional responses designed to push her back into her place. The community center stood like a defiant fortress among the deteriorating buildings of East Westridge, its faded brick exterior belying the vibrant activity within. Ayana pushed through the double doors, her backpack heavy with rejection letters from potential second jobs and landlords unwilling to negotiate payment plans. A week had passed since the financial aid office delivered its devastating news, and desperation had driven her to seek help from the very resources she had always been too proud to use. The center offered emergency housing assistance, and with only 2 weeks until potential eviction, Ayana had no choice but to explore every option. She stopped short upon entering the main hall, surprised to find Elijah not among those seeking services, but behind a folding table, patiently explaining budget worksheets to an elderly woman. His tattered jacket hung on the chair behind him, revealing a clean but simple button-up shirt. Ayana watched as he demonstrated calculations with gentle authority, his fingers tracing numbers with precision that spoke of deep familiarity. When he finally looked up and saw her, his expression shifted from surprise to concern. "You all right?" he asked, excusing himself from the woman who patted his hand gratefully. Ayana tried to maintain her composure, but the strain of the past week cracked her usual resilience. "My housing stipend got cut. I can't afford rent anymore, and the timing is too perfect to be coincidence. The university never reviews scholarships mid-semester unless there's misconduct." Elijah guided her to a quiet corner, his focus unwavering as she explained her situation. When she finished, he didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he asked, "Have they provided the exact policy citation for this review? Every financial aid decision must reference specific guidelines to be legally enforceable." His knowledge surprised her once again. Ayana shook her head. "Just a generic statement about budget constraints." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "That's your leverage point. Request a formal appeal hearing and demand they provide the specific policy allowing mid-semester adjustments. If they can't, they're violating their own procedures. Mention that you're documenting everything for potential legal review." The confidence in his strategy made Ayana study him more closely. "You really did work in finance, didn't you?" Elijah's eyes flickered with something she couldn't quite identify. "Just enough to understand how systems are designed to work against certain people unless you know how to speak their language." Over the next several hours, Elijah helped Ayana draft her appeal letter, explaining legal terminology with the ease of someone intimately familiar with corporate structures. As they worked, their conversation deepened, touching on shared experiences of discrimination that transcended their apparently different backgrounds. Elijah described watching his mother struggle against predatory lending practices that specifically targeted black homeowners in his childhood neighborhood. "They took everything from her," he said quietly, his eyes distant with memory. "That's when I decided to understand their weapons so I could fight back." Ayana found herself sharing her own family's struggles, how her parents worked multiple jobs to provide opportunities they never had, how her father's applications for business loans were repeatedly denied despite perfect credit, how her mother's career advancement mysteriously stalled while less qualified white colleagues moved upward. As evening approached, they walked back toward campus together, their connection strengthened by mutual understanding. However, the bubble of solidarity burst quickly when they crossed onto university grounds. Security vehicles began circling them with increasing frequency, never stopping but always present. Students whispered as they passed, some openly staring. Professor Whitman, Ayana's economics advisor, approached them outside the library with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Jackson," he said, completely ignoring Elijah, "I noticed your participation has been lacking in recent discussions." "Is everything all right?" Ayana bristled at the implication. "I've contributed in every class, Professor. My paper on wealth distribution patterns was just accepted for the undergraduate research symposium." He nodded dismissively. "Yes, well, sometimes our focus can become distracted by outside influences." His gaze flicked briefly to Elijah before returning to her. "Remember that your scholarship requires maintaining not just grades, but also professional conduct befitting Westridge standards." He walked away before she could respond, leaving a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The following day brought another blow. The prestigious Markham Finance internship Ayana had secured for the spring semester was suddenly reassigned. The email explained that after further consideration, another candidate better fit their current needs. That other candidate, Ayana soon discovered, was her roommate Taylor, who had never even expressed interest in the position. When confronted, Taylor shrugged with practiced innocence. "Dean Harrington recommended me, said it would be perfect for my portfolio." Something broke inside Ayana then, the careful composure she had maintained, cracking under the accumulated weight of these two convenient coincidences. She found Elijah at their usual meeting spot near the campus edge, her words tumbling out in angry confusion. "It's like they're systematically cutting off every opportunity I've earned." "Why? Because I talked to you? Because I didn't just walk past like everyone else?" Elijah's face darkened with something more complex than anger. "It's not about me specifically, though I'm a convenient trigger. It's about maintaining their comfort with who belongs where. You stepped out of the lane they assigned you." His insight was interrupted by shouting from the campus security booth. The same guards from their first encounter approached, hands hovering near their belts. "You need to leave university property immediately," the taller one ordered Elijah. "We've had reports of solicitation." Ayana stepped forward, outraged. "He's not soliciting anything." "We're just talking." The guard turned to her, his expression hardening. "Unless you want your own conduct reviewed, I suggest you step back." The threat was unmistakable. Elijah slowly raised his hands in a gesture both compliant and deeply symbolic of the power dynamics at play. "It's all right, Ayana, I'll go." But something in his calm dignity ignited Ayana's resistance. "No, it's not all right. This is targeted harassment, and I'm recording everything from now on." As their confrontation escalated, with security calling for backup and Ayana refusing to back down, neither noticed the sleek black town car that had stopped at the campus entrance. Only when a man in an expensive suit stepped out, his eyes widening in recognition, did Elijah suddenly tense. "Elijah? Is that you?" the man called, already walking toward them with purpose. Without explanation, Elijah grabbed Ayana's hand, whispering urgently, "I have to go. Don't trust anything they tell you about me." Before she could process his words, he was running across the lawn, disappearing between buildings as the man from the car shouted after him. Ayana stood frozen between security guards demanding her identification and the stranger demanding to know her relationship with Elijah, a sinking feeling in her stomach that whatever truth lay behind his mysterious past was far more complicated than she had imagined. The fluorescent lights of the 24th homeless shelter Ayana had visited in 5 days buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the tired faces of those seeking refuge from October's increasingly bitter cold. For nearly a week, she had searched relentlessly for Elijah, her academic responsibilities sliding dangerously as she spent every free moment between classes and work shifts checking shelters, soup kitchens, and community centers across the city. Each location yielded the same response. They recognized her description but hadn't seen him recently. Some staff members watched her with growing suspicion, her designer backpack a jarring contrast to their client's circumstances, despite its being a factory second she'd found at a discount outlet. The gap between her world and theirs remained, regardless of her own precarious financial situation. A heavy-set woman behind the intake desk studied Ayana's university ID with narrowed eyes. "You're the third person asking about him this week." "You police?" Ayana's heart skipped. Who else is looking for him? The woman shrugged. Some men in suits. Said they were family, but nobody believed that. Shelter directory policy says we don't confirm or deny who stays here. Ayana left, more worried than before. Back on campus, new troubles awaited. Her economics professor returned her midterm paper with a C-, citing insufficient analysis, though the margins contained no specific criticisms. When she requested clarification, Professor Whitman suggested she visit the Academic Support Center, implying her writing suddenly needed remedial attention. In advanced statistical methods, her usual study group found excuses to reschedule when she tried to confirm their meeting time. Even the cafe manager began scrutinizing her work schedule, questioning breaks that had never been issues before. The pattern was undeniable. Her academic standing, built through years of exceptional performance, was eroding rapidly, with no explanation beyond her association with Elijah. The library provided temporary sanctuary, though even there, Ayana felt eyes tracking her movements. She claimed a corner desk for research on her economics paper, examining racial disparities in lending practices before and after the Fair Housing Act. The university's research databases yielded the expected academic studies, but a new search parameter, a combination of dates and keywords related to racial discrimination in pharmaceutical testing, brought unexpected results. A business journal from the previous year featured a prominent black executive named Elijah Brooks Hamilton, CEO of Hammond Industries, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country. The photograph showed a clean-shaven man in an impeccable suit, his posture confident, his smile practiced for corporate photography. Despite these differences, the eyes were unmistakable, the same ones that had looked at Ayana with such genuine connection. The article detailed his mysterious disappearance 11 months ago, with company statements citing personal health issues and temporary leave that had stretched into indefinite absence. More disturbing were the subsequent articles suggesting mental health struggles, with anonymous board member quotes expressing concern about erratic behavior before his departure. Ayana sat back, connecting events with growing clarity. Her financial aid cut, lost internship, academic struggles, increased security presence, all began after she befriended Elijah. Someone wanted him isolated, and anyone who helped him punished. The next day, the campus newspaper ran a front-page story about homeless individuals targeting vulnerable students with thinly veiled references to Elijah. The quotes came primarily from students who had never interacted with him, repeating rumors about criminal backgrounds and potential dangers. Ayana recognized Taylor's phrasing in several anonymous comments. Her isolation intensified. Former friends now hurried past with quick, uncomfortable nods. Professors who once praised her contributions now called on her less frequently. The financial aid office delayed her appeal hearing twice for administrative reasons. When she reported the pattern of harassment to the university's equity office, the administrator, a white woman with practiced sympathy, suggested that perhaps Ayana was overreacting to standard procedures. Have you considered that your recent academic challenges might be causing you to perceive normal university operations as targeted actions? The woman asked, her tone condescending. These experiences can feel very personal when you're already under stress. Ayana left the office with the distinct understanding that no institutional support would be forthcoming. After 3 more days of searching, a volunteer at a church soup kitchen finally gave her information. The bearded man you're looking for? Try Street Matthews on 42nd Street. They have a smaller shelter, keeps a lower profile. The weathered brick building sat between abandoned storefronts, its basement windows emitting weak light. Inside, Ayana found Elijah helping organize donated clothing, his beard thicker, his frame thinner than when she'd last seen him. When he looked up and saw her, a complex mixture of emotions crossed his face: relief, fear, resignation. Ayana didn't waste time with pleasantries. You're Elijah Brooks Hamilton. You were CEO of Hammond Industries until last year. Why are you living on the streets when you're worth billions? Elijah slowly set down the coat he was folding. Let's walk. Outside, they moved through empty streets as Elijah verified what she'd discovered and filled crucial gaps. Yes, I was CEO. Technically still am. though the board has certainly tried to change that. I didn't have a breakdown or health crisis. I discovered something they wanted buried. Ayana waited silently as he gathered his thoughts, clearly struggling with how much to reveal. Hammond developed a hypertension medication called Cardiofix. Highly effective in clinical trials, massively profitable. 6 months after widespread release, reports started coming in about severe side effects, kidney failure, stroke, even deaths. His voice tightened. Our data analysts identified a pattern. The side effects appeared almost exclusively in patients of African descent. Something in the drug interacted differently with specific genetic markers more common in black populations. Ayana felt cold, despite the evening's mild temperature. And let me guess, they didn't want to recall it. Elijah's bitter laugh held no humor. The board chairman, Victor Hammond, explained that recalling the drug would cost billions, damage the company's reputation, and potentially create legal liability. He proposed simply adding warning language to prescribing information and continuing sales. When I pushed back, Victor reminded me how many shareholders, including thousands of regular people's retirement accounts, would be hurt by a recall. Then he showed me the market analysis. The affected population primarily used government insurance programs, which reimbursed at lower rates. The most profitable patient groups weren't affected. They were watching for my reaction, and I made a strategic mistake. I couldn't hide my disgust. Ayana processed this information, connecting it to her own family's experiences. My aunt died last year from kidney failure after taking blood pressure medication. The doctors couldn't explain why it happened so suddenly. She was only 46. Elijah closed his eyes briefly. I'm so sorry. There are thousands like her. That's why I left everything behind. I needed to understand the real impact, not just read reports. Living on the streets gave me direct contact with the community's most affected people who couldn't afford to sue, whose deaths wouldn't make news. I've been gathering evidence, connecting with patients, documenting patterns while trying to stay under Hammond's radar. Why not go public immediately? Ayana asked. Elijah's expression darkened. Victor launched a preemptive campaign questioning my mental stability before I could gather enough evidence. He controls the board now. Any accusation I make gets filtered through that lens, and Hammond Industries has the resources to bury the story and discredit anyone associated with me. That includes you now. I've been anonymously funding legal aid for victims while building an irrefutable case. The confrontation at campus makes sense now. Ayana saw the complete picture with devastating clarity. Someone at Hammond Industries identified you, and they've been watching. They're using the university to pressure me because we were seen together. Elijah nodded grimly. Victor has connections everywhere, including Westridge's board of trustees. Your academic file probably has convenient disciplinary warnings you never received. The system is designed to make you question yourself, make you wonder if speaking up is worth the cost. The next morning, Ayana discovered just how accurate his assessment was. Her student portal showed 2 academic integrity warnings supposedly issued months ago, though she had never been notified. When she tried to access her original scholarship agreement to verify the terms, the system returned an error message. Each institutional obstacle confirmed the invisible power working against them. As they developed a plan to expose Hammond's actions, surveillance and intimidation increased. Unmarked vehicles parked outside Ayana's apartment. Her email showed signs of tampering. Elijah reported being stopped and questioned by police 3 times in 2 days, officers always mentioning complaints that exactly matched his movements. Their challenges seemed insurmountable until Ayana received an anonymous email containing hospital records documenting dozens of unreported deaths in predominantly black neighborhoods following Cardiofix prescriptions. Attached was an internal memo showing Hammond knew the risks months before Elijah discovered them. The sender's message was brief. Not everyone at Hammond agrees with Victor. Be careful who you trust. The evidence was damning, but using it would expose them to even greater danger. As they reviewed the documents in the basement of Street Matthews, Elijah looked at Ayana with concern. You can still walk away. Return to your life. Focus on graduation. I never meant to drag you into this. Ayana thought about her aunt, about her own compromised future, about all the patients whose lives were deemed acceptable losses. Walking away isn't an option anymore. They made this my fight, too. The offices of the Community Voice newspaper occupied a modest storefront in a historically black neighborhood 15 miles from Westridge University's manicured campus. Inside, the space hummed with activity despite outdated computers and furniture that had seen better decades. Journalist Jasmine Wallace examined the documents spread across her desk, periodically glancing up at Ayana and Elijah with a mixture of shock and professional calculation. "This is explosive," she finally said, removing her glasses to rub tired eyes. Over 300 cases showing identical patterns of kidney failure, stroke, and cardiac events, all occurring within months of beginning cardiofix, all in black patients. And Hammond Industries knew about the genetic interaction before widespread distribution? Elijah nodded grimly. The initial genetic testing was limited, focusing primarily on participants of European descent. When post-market data showed the pattern, the company buried it, reclassifying deaths under more generic causes to dilute the statistical significance. He pointed to specific memos. This communication from Victor Hammond explicitly instructs marketing to focus on practitioners in predominantly white neighborhoods while maintaining presence in other communities for appearance sake. Jasmine took detailed notes, her expression hardening. "We've been covering the increased kidney failure rates in our community for months without connecting it to this medication. The mainstream health authorities dismissed it as diet-related or genetic predisposition." She looked directly at Elijah. "Why come to us? Hammond Industries has relationships with every major news outlet in the country. I contacted 6 national publications. Each one reached out to Hammond Industries for comment before even reviewing our evidence. Within hours, their interest evaporated. The last journalist honestly told me they received calls from their ownership group." Jasmine wasn't surprised. That's why independent black press still matters. But you should know what you're starting. Hammond has tentacles everywhere, including city government, regulatory agencies, even courts. He's donated millions to politicians who oversee pharmaceutical regulations. This story will make powerful enemies. While they strategized the best approach for breaking the story, Ayana's phone buzzed with an email notification from Westridge University. The message was brief but devastating. She was summoned to a disciplinary hearing the following Monday for alleged academic dishonesty. The evidence cited included plagiarized passages in 3 different papers throughout her academic career, with side-by-side comparisons of her writing against source material. Alleged witnesses claimed to have seen her cheating during exams. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. They're manufacturing evidence, Ayana realized, her hands shaking with anger. The papers they're citing were all graded A+, with my professor's comments about my original analysis. They're creating a false history to discredit me before we can publish. Elijah's face darkened. This is exactly how they operate. When they can't attack the message, they destroy the messenger. While Jasmine began organizing the medical evidence and drafting initial reports, Elijah attempted to access emergency funds he had hidden before his disappearance. He returned hours later, his expression grim. "They've frozen everything, even accounts not in my name. Hammond must have convinced the banks I'm mentally incompetent." Their personal challenges multiplied as their investigation deepened. 2 students from Ayana's economics class, Jordan and Deshawn, approached her off-campus, having noticed her sudden ostracism. After hearing a partial explanation, they revealed that Jordan's grandmother had died after taking cardiofix, while Deshawn's father was currently hospitalized with unexplained kidney issues while on the medication. They joined the growing coalition, helping connect with affected families and gathering additional testimonies. Finding secure housing became an unexpected hurdle. When Ayana and Elijah attempted to rent a small office to safely store their evidence and work without surveillance, they encountered refusal after refusal, despite offering cash payment. One honest property manager finally explained, "Someone's been calling around about you too, suggesting you're involved in fraud. Said I'd regret renting to you." Meanwhile, Hammond Industries launched a preemptive strategy, offering settlements to select patients experiencing side effects. The legal documents included strict confidentiality clauses, specifically prohibiting discussion of any racial patterns in the outcomes. Many families, already devastated by medical bills and funeral costs, accepted the offers out of necessity. Hammond's attorneys emphasized the company's generosity, while implying litigation would be unsuccessful given the complexity of proving causation. Elijah faced increasing restrictions on his movement, with police detaining him multiple times on vague suspicions. Each incident followed a similar pattern. Officers claimed to have received anonymous tips about a man matching his description engaging in suspicious activity. He was never arrested, just held long enough to disrupt their work and demonstrate the reach of Hammond's influence. Despite these obstacles, their investigation gained momentum as more hospital staff came forward with data showing the unmistakable connection between cardiofix and fatalities in Black patients. Ayana appeared before the disciplinary committee, despite Elijah's concerns about it being a trap. The hearing proceeded exactly as they feared, with manufactured evidence and testimony from students she barely knew, including Taylor, who claimed Ayana had pressured her to share answers during exams. When Ayana presented her original paper drafts with professor feedback as counter-evidence, the committee chairman, a close associate of Dean Harrington, dismissed them as potentially falsified. As the proceedings concluded with the expected recommendation for expulsion, Professor Whitman approached her in the hallway. His usual academic reserve had given way to barely contained anger. "You had such promise, Miss Jackson. Such a waste to throw it away on conspiracy theories and dangerous associations. I tried to warn you about maintaining proper standards of conduct." Ayana stood her ground. "This isn't about my conduct. It's about silencing me before I can expose Hammond Industries, the pharmaceutical company manipulating this university to protect its profits." Professor Whitman's reaction confirmed everything. His face flushed as he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a threatening whisper. "Victor Hammond has contributed millions to this institution. His family built the science center where you've taken classes. Do you really think your accusations against a man of his standing will be believed, especially coming from a student being expelled for academic dishonesty?" He leaned closer, his control slipping further. "The medication story is nonsense. Statistics can show any pattern if manipulated properly. The board reviewed the data thoroughly and found no conclusive evidence of racial disparities in outcomes." Ayana maintained outward calm despite her racing heart, acutely aware of what was happening. In his anger, Whitman was confirming the conspiracy, admitting knowledge of internal board discussions that would never have been public. "You seem very familiar with Hammond Industries' internal reviews, Professor. Do you have some connection to the company I should know about?" His expression shifted, realizing his mistake too late. What he didn't notice was Deshawn positioned nearby, phone recording the entire exchange. When Whitman realized he was potentially being recorded, he abruptly walked away, but the damage was done. Later that evening, when they reviewed the recording, Elijah identified the final piece of the puzzle. Whitman isn't just connected to Hammond Industries. He's Victor Hammond's brother-in-law. He helped design the statistical models that obscured the racial patterns in the clinical data. With this evidence of direct university involvement in the cover-up, combined with the patient data and internal memos, they finally had enough to move forward. Jasmine promised the first article would run in 2 days, focusing initially on the medical evidence before expanding to include the corporate and academic conspiracy. As they left her office that night, Ayana felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread, knowing they had passed the point where retreat was possible. Either they would expose one of the largest cases of corporate racial discrimination in recent history, or their lives would be systematically destroyed by those determined to keep the truth buried. Either way, nothing would ever be the same again. Rain pounded against the windows of the Community Voice office as the first edition bearing the headline, "Deadly Discrimination, Black Patients Dying from Cardiofix Side Effects," rolled off their modest printing press. The article, meticulously researched and fact-checked, detailed the mounting evidence connecting Hammond Industries' hypertension medication to hundreds of deaths predominantly in Black communities, alongside the company's deliberate efforts to conceal this pattern. Jasmine had structured the story to begin with the human impact individual cases like Ayana's aunt, Jordan's grandmother, and dozens of others whose families had provided medical records and testimonials. The second section presented the statistical evidence, showing rates of adverse events 23 times higher in patients of African descent. The final section outlined the timeline of Hammond's knowledge, supported by leaked internal documents. The impact was immediate but highly divided. Within hours of publication, Hammond Industries issued a statement dismissing the allegations as baseless and irresponsible, threatening legal action against the small newspaper for defamation. Major media outlets initially ignored the story, though social media sharing quickly forced some acknowledgement, generally framed as controversial claims rather than substantiated reporting. By contrast, Black community organizations, independent media, and healthcare advocacy groups amplified the findings, many connecting them to broader patterns of racial disparities in medical research and treatment. Ayana's disciplinary hearing concluded with the expected outcome: official expulsion from Westridge University for academic dishonesty and professional misconduct. The decision cited falsified evidence that she had never seen during the proceedings, making effective appeal nearly impossible. Her academic transcript now carried a permanent mark that would follow her to any other institution. The university's public statement carefully avoided mentioning Hammond Industries or CardioFix, instead emphasizing their commitment to academic integrity and ethical standards. When local reporters requested comment on connections between the expulsion and the pharmaceutical exposé, Westridge spokesperson claimed any suggested relationship was coincidental and inappropriate. Elijah faced even more direct retaliation. 3 days after the article's publication, he was arrested outside Street Matthews Shelter on charges of identity theft and fraud. The arrest warrant, obtained by Hammond's legal team, claimed he had been using fake identification and fraudulently accessing accounts belonging to Elijah Brooks Hamilton. The circular logic was both absurd and effective. He couldn't prove he was himself without access to the very identification and accounts that were now considered fraudulent. With bail set at an impossible $500,000, he remained in custody, effectively silenced as Hammond Industries launched their counteroffensive. The corporation's response followed a calculated strategy. First came character assassination, press releases detailing Elijah's alleged mental health decline, supported by carefully selected board members expressing concern about his well-being while painting him as unstable and paranoid. Next came scientific obfuscation. Hammond released portions of their clinical data showing overall safety, while omitting the demographic breakdowns that would reveal the racial patterns. Finally came financial pressure. Hammond Industries stock initially dropped 12% following the Community Voice article, but major financial analysts quickly issued buy recommendations, describing the controversy as temporary and highlighting the medication's overall profit potential. While mainstream media largely accepted Hammond's narrative, alternative outlets and social media told a different story. The Community Voice's website crashed repeatedly from unprecedented traffic. Local Black radio stations devoted entire programs to the CardioFix issue, with affected families calling in to share experiences that matched the pattern. Medical professionals began publicly questioning the limited demographic representation in the original clinical trials. As public awareness grew, protests formed outside both Hammond Industries headquarters and Westridge University. Community organizations coordinated demonstrations highlighting the racial injustice aspects of the case, with signs connecting pharmaceutical discrimination to broader systemic racism. University students, led by Jordan and Deshawn, organized campus protests challenging the administration's complicity, despite threats of academic consequences. The divide in coverage and response fell along predictable lines. White-owned media portrayed Elijah as unstable and Ayana as manipulated, questioning their motivations while emphasizing the lack of definitive proof. Black-owned media focused on the pattern of deaths, the documented evidence, and the historical context of medical experimentation on Black communities. Jasmine's follow-up articles expanded the investigation, revealing connections between Hammond board members and regulatory officials who had expedited CardioFix's approval despite limited diversity in testing. With Elijah imprisoned and Ayana blacklisted academically, their legal team worked to build a comprehensive case against both Hammond Industries and Westridge University. Dozens of affected families joined as plaintiffs, their combined medical records creating an undeniable statistical pattern that contradicted Hammond's public statements. The legal strategy targeted not just the medication's effects, but the deliberate decision to continue marketing it despite known risks to specific populations. While the case built momentum, Hammond offered Ayana a private meeting, arranged through intermediaries, promising a reasonable resolution. Despite her legal team's concerns about potential manipulation, Ayana agreed, seeing an opportunity to gather additional information. The meeting took place at an upscale hotel, with security checking for recording devices. Victor Hammond, a tall man with silver hair and practiced charm, greeted her with the confident smile of someone accustomed to getting his way. "Miss Jackson, thank you for agreeing to meet. I believe we can resolve this unfortunate situation to everyone's benefit." He slid a document across the table, a settlement offer of $5 million in exchange for her withdrawal from the lawsuit and a signed non-disclosure agreement. "I understand your aunt was among those affected by these regrettable medical incidents. While we maintain there's insufficient evidence connecting these outcomes specifically to cardiofix, we recognize your personal loss and want to make amends." Ayana studied the man whose decisions had caused so much suffering, noting how carefully he avoided acknowledging responsibility while appearing reasonable. The settlement offer represented more money than her entire family had seen across generations, enough to secure her future and help her parents retire early. Hammond watched her carefully, misinterpreting her silence as consideration. "You're a bright young woman with a promising future. This unfortunate association with Elijah Hamilton has temporarily derailed your education, but with proper resources, you could attend any institution. This offer gives you freedom to move forward without the years of litigation that will likely end inconclusively." His confidence that money could resolve everything, that principles had a price tag, solidified Ayana's resolve. She stood, leaving the document untouched. "My aunt's life wasn't a regrettable medical incident. She was a teacher who raised 3 children on her own and volunteered every weekend at her church. Your company knew the medication would kill people who looked like her, and you decided that was acceptable. You can't buy my silence." Even as she walked out, Hammond's voice followed her with chilling certainty. "Consider carefully, Miss Jackson. Everyone has their price. If not you, perhaps others in your coalition will be more practical." Indeed, in the days that followed, Hammond Industries approached other plaintiffs with similar offers, strategically targeting those in most desperate financial circumstances. Some families, facing crushing medical debts and limited resources, reluctantly accepted. Others contacted Ayana, torn between immediate needs and longer justice. The pressure extended to her own family when her father's small landscaping business suddenly lost several major contracts, including the Westridge University grounds maintenance he had handled for 8 years. When questioned, clients vaguely mentioned receiving concerns about the quality of his work, though no specific issues could be identified. Her mother, an administrative assistant at a local insurance office, was passed over for a previously promised promotion, with management citing budget constraints. The message was clear. Hammond's influence could affect not just Ayana but everyone connected to her. As these personal pressures mounted, a surprising development shifted the landscape. Hammond's executive assistant, a woman who had worked for the company for 22 years, anonymously provided documents showing board members had sold significant stock holdings just before the side effects became public knowledge. The trades, perfectly timed to avoid the temporary price drops, provided clear evidence of insider trading violations, potentially triggering federal securities investigations that even Hammond's connections couldn't easily dismiss. When these documents reached Jasmine's desk, they opened a new front in the battle. Hammond Industries had successfully contained the medical discrimination story to primarily black media outlets, but financial fraud allegations involving wealthy executives attracted broader interest. As mainstream business publications began questioning the stock transactions, the original cardiofix story gained credibility through association. The walls, carefully constructed to contain the truth, began showing the first significant cracks, and with them came the possibility that justice, however partial, might eventually be possible. The headquarters of the Securities and Exchange Commission stood imposingly against the Washington, D.C. skyline, its architecture projecting the governmental authority now focused on Hammond Industries. Following the revelations about suspicious stock transactions, federal investigators had launched an official inquiry into potential securities fraud by board members who had sold shares while withholding material information about CardioFix risks. For Hammond Industries, this development represented a dangerous escalation. While the company had successfully contained the racial discrimination allegations to primarily black media outlets and community organizations, securities violations fell under federal jurisdiction and carried potential criminal penalties that even Victor Hammond's connections couldn't easily neutralize. Inside the SEC building, investigators interviewed the whistleblower executive assistant who had provided the trading records, her identity protected under federal statutes designed to encourage reporting of corporate malfeasance. Her testimony detailed meetings where board members discussed the emerging pattern of deaths while planning stock divestments, creating an evidence trail that extended beyond the medical discrimination into clear financial crimes. As the federal investigation gained momentum, Ayana faced increasingly personal attacks. Anonymous accounts posted her personal information online, including her address and phone number, leading to harassment and threats. Fake profiles appeared on social media platforms, attributing inflammatory statements to her, attempting to paint her as radical and unreliable. When she appeared at community events to speak about the case, Hammond supporters arrived with signs questioning her credibility and motives. Despite these intimidation tactics, public support continued growing as more families recognized the patterns in their own experiences with CardioFix. The community voice established a dedicated hotline for reporting cases, which quickly received hundreds of calls from across the country. Each new testimonial strengthened both the statistical evidence and the human impact narrative, making the pattern increasingly difficult to dismiss. At Westridge University, pressure mounted from unexpected directions. Several major donors, including Black alumni who had been following the case closely, contacted university leadership expressing concern about the institution's handling of Ayana's expulsion and its apparent cooperation with Hammond Industries. One particularly influential alumnus, the CEO of a technology company who had previously donated millions for scholarship programs, publicly questioned whether the university's actions aligned with its stated commitment to racial equity and scientific integrity. The administration, caught between Hammond's influence and growing external criticism, attempted to distance themselves from the controversy while maintaining Ayana's expulsion. When reporters questioned the university president about Professor Whitman's recorded statements acknowledging the Hammond connection, the response was carefully crafted to acknowledge only that they were reviewing all matters pertaining to potential conflicts of interest. While Ayana coordinated community response and Jasmine continued publishing new developments, Elijah remained in custody, his bail requirements designed specifically to keep him detained. However, his legal team had managed to secure a court order compelling Hammond Industries to provide documentation proving he was not Elijah Brooks Hamilton. This procedural victory forced the company to either produce evidence supporting their claim of identity fraud or acknowledge his identity, creating a legal contradiction they couldn't easily resolve. After 26 days in detention, Elijah was released when prosecutors couldn't substantiate the identity theft charges. Hammond immediately pivoted to a new strategy, with company representatives approaching him about returning to his position as CEO to help clean up what they now characterized as unfortunate misunderstandings. The offer, delivered by a board member who had privately opposed Victor Hammond's leadership, suggested Elijah could implement necessary changes from within while restoring his reputation and wealth. "We made mistakes in handling the CardioFix situation," the board member admitted cautiously. "But destroying the company won't help the patients or communities affected. You could return with full authority to address these issues properly, create better testing protocols, establish a victim compensation fund." The company needs ethical leadership from someone who understands these communities. The proposal created unexpected tension between Ayana and Elijah. When he shared the offer during a strategy meeting at the Community Voice office, Ayana couldn't hide her disbelief. "You're actually considering it, after everything they've done?" Elijah looked exhausted, the weeks of detention and years of living underground visible in the lines of his face. "I'm considering whether real change happens from outside the system or within it." Hammond Industries employs thousands of people, most having nothing to do with CardioFix decisions. Its medications treat millions of patients. If I could redirect its resources toward ethical research and proper representation in clinical trials, wouldn't that create more meaningful change than simply punishing the company? Their philosophical disagreement about institutional reform versus accountability created the first significant rift in their relationship. Ayana viewed any compromise with Hammond as betrayal of the victims, while Elijah argued that sustainable change might require working within existing power structures. Their disagreement remained unresolved when Ayana received an unexpected communication from Westridge University offering full reinstatement with an expanded scholarship covering all expenses. The letter, signed by the university president, characterized her expulsion as a regrettable error based on misunderstandings and insufficient review. While not explicitly acknowledging wrongdoing, the document emphasized Westridge's commitment to supporting diverse voices and academic freedom. Like the offer to Elijah, this apparent victory came with implicit expectations of settling the matter quietly. The reinstatement notably mentioned nothing about Hammond Industries, Professor Whitman, or the broader issues of institutional complicity and corporate discrimination. When Ayana brought the letter to their legal team, the lead attorney highlighted concerning language about accepting the reinstatement constituting resolution of all claims and grievances against the university. As institutional pressure tactics shifted from punishment to co-optation, the community coalition faced internal divisions. Some affected families viewed the SEC investigation and institutional retreats as sufficient progress to justify accepting settlements that would provide immediate financial relief. Others, particularly those who had lost loved ones, insisted on full accountability and public acknowledgement of the racial discrimination that had driven Hammond's decisions. Ayana found herself mediating between these perspectives while struggling with her own principles around justice and pragmatism. The situation reached critical mass when Victor Hammond, facing mounting legal challenges and potential criminal charges, abruptly left the country. His departure to a jurisdiction with limited extradition agreements suggested he anticipated serious legal consequences from the SEC investigation. Hammond Industries' stock plummeted on the news, with financial analysts downgrading projections and questioning the company's leadership stability. Board members began distancing themselves from previous decisions, characterizing CardioFix problems as primarily Victor's responsibility while positioning themselves as reformers. As these developments unfolded, Elijah revealed he had been secretly developing an alternative hypertension medication specifically tested across diverse genetic backgrounds to ensure safety for all populations. The research, funded through anonymous channels before his disappearance, was nearly complete, but needed additional resources for final testing and production. This scientific solution offered a potential path forward that acknowledged the harm while creating tangible benefits for affected communities. The complex balancing of justice, healing, and practical impact became the central tension as they approached what seemed like possible resolution. However, just as momentum appeared to favor their cause, Victor Hammond returned unexpectedly, calling a press conference where he revealed information designed to destroy Elijah's credibility once and for all. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hammond began with practiced solemnity, "I've returned to address the unfortunate controversies surrounding our company. While we acknowledge concerns about CardioFix that we're actively investigating, I must address the personal campaign against me by Elijah Brooks Hamilton." His cameras panned to display photographs of a much younger Elijah alongside Hammond. What the public doesn't know is that Elijah isn't simply a former employee or even just a former CEO. 25 years ago, I adopted him from a struggling young mother in our community, as part of our corporate outreach initiatives. His face displayed practiced compassion. I provided him every advantage, including the education that eventually led to his executive position. Unfortunately, despite years of support for his psychological challenges, Elijah's condition deteriorated, leading to paranoid delusions about the company and myself. These serious accusations about racial targeting are manifestations of deeply personal issues rather than corporate reality. He looked directly into the cameras. I'm sharing this painful family history only because the public deserves to understand the context of these allegations. We continue to hope Elijah will accept the professional help he needs. This calculated revelation, combining truth with devastating distortion, threatened to reframe the entire narrative from corporate discrimination to family dysfunction and mental illness. As media outlets rushed to report this dramatic development, the coalition faced their greatest challenge yet: maintaining focus on the documented pattern of deaths while navigating the newly personal dimensions of the conflict. The press conference concluded with Hammond announcing his temporary return to leadership to restore stability, presenting himself as the reluctant but necessary solution to chaos created by others. When reporters asked about the SEC investigation, he dismissed it as routine oversight that would ultimately vindicate the company's practices. As the press conference footage played on screens at the Community Voice office, Ayana watched Elijah's expression harden into cold determination. She realized the revelation, rather than breaking him as Hammond intended, had somehow strengthened his resolve. "You knew he would use this against you eventually," she said quietly. Elijah nodded. "I've spent years preparing for this moment, knowing Victor would eventually weaponize my childhood. What he doesn't understand is that by acknowledging our connection, he's validated everything else. He can't claim I'm an imposter while simultaneously calling me his adopted son. And when reporters start investigating the details of that adoption, they'll find a very different story than the charitable narrative he's presenting." The personal nature of Hammond's attack had inadvertently opened new avenues for investigation, including records of the adoption itself and Elijah's early relationship with Hammond Industries. As they prepared their response, Ayana recognized that the conflict had evolved beyond the cardiofix issue into something far more complex, a multi-layered struggle over truth, power, and the structures that determined whose stories were believed and whose lives were valued. The public battle between Hammond's institutional authority and their grassroots coalition would ultimately determine not just accountability for hundreds of deaths, but the broader question of whether corporate power could successfully override documented patterns of racial discrimination through narrative control and strategic distortion. Federal agents moved methodically through Hammond Industries headquarters, cardboard boxes accumulating as they seized financial records, board meeting minutes, and internal communications pursuant to the expanding SEC investigation. Victor Hammond's return and public statements had backfired dramatically, drawing increased scrutiny rather than controlling the narrative as he'd intended. His characterization of Elijah as mentally unstable prompted journalists to investigate the adoption story, uncovering troubling inconsistencies that raised questions about Hammond's credibility. Court records revealed the adoption had indeed occurred, but under circumstances far removed from Hammond's charitable portrayal. Elijah's mother had been an early participant in Hammond Industries' clinical trials, who experienced severe side effects. The adoption coincided with a sealed settlement agreement, suggesting the company had taken her child in exchange for compensation and medical care, a narrative starkly different from the corporate philanthropy Hammond described. As these revelations emerged, mainstream media outlets finally began covering the cardiofix story with the skepticism it deserved, recognizing the pattern of manipulation that characterized Hammond's leadership. Financial analysts downgraded Hammond Industries stock on concerns about liability exposure, with class action lawsuits now covering over 800 affected patients and families. Institutional investors pressed for board restructuring, questioning Hammond's fitness to lead given the expanding evidence of regulatory violations and potential criminal liability. Within the company, factions formed between Hammond loyalists and those positioning themselves as reformers advocating for new leadership and transparency. Several board members approached Elijah privately, offering support for his return under specific conditions that would limit public acknowledgement of past wrongdoing, while implementing procedural changes to prevent future issues. These overtures presented a complex ethical dilemma: the opportunity to implement meaningful reforms within the company versus the compromise on accountability such an arrangement would require. The decision became a focal point of tension between Elijah and Ayana, their different perspectives reflecting broader questions about institutional change versus justice. "You have the opportunity to transform Hammond Industries from within," Elijah argued during a tense discussion at their legal team's office. "I could implement comprehensive diversity requirements for clinical trials, establish community oversight boards with real authority, direct resources toward addressing health disparities. These systemic changes would affect millions of patients long-term," Ayana countered with equal conviction. "And what message does that send? That corporations can discriminate, cover it up, destroy lives, and then continue with minimal consequences? Hammond Industries killed hundreds of black people through deliberate indifference. They destroyed my academic career and threatened my family. They imprisoned you on false charges. Reform without accountability isn't justice, it's just quieter oppression." Their philosophical disagreement reflected the divided perspectives within the broader coalition of affected families and communities. Some prioritized practical outcomes: compensation for victims, improved medication safety, and resources for affected communities. Others insisted on public accountability, including criminal charges for decision-makers and formal acknowledgement of the racial discrimination that had driven corporate choices. As these tensions simmered, Hammond made a desperate attempt to salvage both his position and the company's reputation. He approached Ayana directly, bypassing attorneys to offer an unprecedented settlement: $50 million distributed among affected families, a personal scholarship foundation in her name, and her aunt's name on a new research center focused on health equity. The offer included substantial financial support for her parents and siblings, effectively ensuring generational wealth for her family in exchange for her withdrawal from the lawsuit and public statement expressing confidence in Hammond's leadership. The scale of the offer momentarily shook Ayana's resolve. The resources could transform hundreds of lives, providing immediate relief to families devastated by medical bills and funeral costs. The Scholarship Foundation could support thousands of minority students pursuing medical careers, potentially addressing systemic disparities in healthcare representation. Yet the offer came with the implicit understanding that Hammond would retain control, that the fundamental power structures would remain unchanged, and that the documented pattern of racial discrimination would never be officially acknowledged. The personal nature of Hammond's approach revealed his strategic assessment that Ayana, not Elijah, represented the most significant threat to his control. While Elijah could be potentially reintegrated into corporate structures through appeals to his insider status and financial interests, Ayana's moral authority derived precisely from her outsider position and principled stance. Hammond recognized that her rejection of institutional power made her more difficult to neutralize through traditional means. As Ayana considered the settlement, her family faced mounting pressure. Anonymous callers suggested her father might regain his university landscaping contract if she adopted a more reasonable approach. Her mother received hints from supervisors that her professional advancement opportunities could improve depending on family decisions. Even distant relatives reported strange encounters with individuals expressing interest in Ayana's activities and suggesting the family's financial security might depend on her choices. These coercive tactics, rather than weakening her resolve, crystallized the fundamental nature of their struggle. The fight wasn't simply about CardioFix or even Hammond Industries, but about the systems that allowed powerful institutions to calculate the acceptable cost of black lives, to weaponize opportunity and access against those who challenged established hierarchies. Ayana's decision came not through dramatic revelation, but through quiet clarity. During a community meeting where affected families shared stories of loved ones lost to CardioFix, an elderly woman described her husband of 52 years, a Vietnam veteran whose hypertension had been well controlled until his doctor switched him to the new medication. He died believing his body had failed him, she explained, her dignity palpable despite her grief. He never knew the medication was killing him. He deserved to know the truth. The simple statement encapsulated everything at stake. Ayana declined Hammond's offer the following day, recommitting to the lawsuit and public advocacy despite the personal cost. Her decision coincided with a pivotal development. One of Hammond's security personnel, troubled by recent events, provided video footage of a board meeting where Hammond explicitly discussed acceptable losses in certain communities, while ensuring the medication was pulled from wealthier white neighborhoods where complications would generate greater liability and media attention. The video, showing Hammond calculating different values for lives based on community demographics, sparked immediate outrage when released by the Community Voice. Unlike previous evidence that required interpretation or context, the visual impact of watching a CEO explicitly discuss racial disparitization in life-saving medical care created an undeniable narrative that even sympathetic media outlets couldn't easily rationalize. The footage went viral across social platforms, generating millions of views within hours and triggering protests outside Hammond facilities nationwide. Corporate partners and clients began distancing themselves from Hammond Industries, unwilling to risk association with such explicit discrimination. Politicians who had previously accepted Hammond campaign contributions hastily announced donations to health equity organizations. The board, recognizing the existential threat to the company's survival, called an emergency meeting to discuss leadership changes. As public pressure mounted, Elijah received an unprecedented communication. The board had voted to remove Victor Hammond, offering Elijah reinstatement as CEO with full authority to implement reforms, compensate victims, and redirect the company's resources toward addressing the harm caused. The offer represented everything he had strategically worked toward: the opportunity to transform the institution from within, using its vast resources to implement meaningful changes in pharmaceutical testing, development, and distribution. Yet accepting would mean working within systems fundamentally designed to prioritize profit over human cost, particularly when those costs fell predominantly on marginalized communities. The decision represented not just a personal career choice, but a philosophical stance on whether true change required working within existing power structures or creating new models entirely. The controversy had evolved beyond Hammond Industries to represent broader questions about corporate accountability, racial justice in healthcare, and the systems that determined which lives were valued. As Hammond's explicit discrimination sparked national conversation about racial disparities in medical treatment, the coalition Ayana and Elijah had built faced their most significant challenge: navigating the transition from fighting for recognition of the problem to implementing solutions that would create lasting change without reinforcing the very power structures that had enabled the discrimination. The boardroom of Hammond Industries no longer projected the unquestioned authority it once commanded. Paintings of former executives, including Victor Hammond's grandfather who founded the company, still hung on wood-paneled walls, but the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. Security guards stood discreetly near the doors, a visual reminder of the tumultuous shareholders' meeting that had ended hours earlier with Victor Hammond's formal removal as CEO. His final address had devolved into thinly veiled threats and accusations, requiring his physical removal from the property he had controlled for nearly 3 decades. Now the remaining board members sat in uncomfortable silence as Elijah Brooks Hamilton considered their offer of reinstatement with full decision-making authority. The proposal included everything he had fought for: comprehensive victim compensation, reformed testing protocols, transparent community oversight, and resources dedicated to addressing health disparities. It represented the opportunity to transform Hammond Industries from within, using its vast resources and research capabilities to implement systemic changes that could potentially save thousands of lives. Senior board member Catherine Chen leaned forward, breaking the silence. "The company needs your leadership, Elijah. The truth is, most of us were uncomfortable with Victor's decisions, but lacked the courage to challenge him. You have both the moral authority and practical experience to rebuild trust while maintaining the organization's critical medical research." Elijah studied the faces around the table, recognizing the complex mixture of genuine concern and self-preservation motivating their offer. His return would provide institutional continuity while symbolizing change perfect for minimizing financial damage while maximizing public relations value. Meanwhile, across town, Ayana faced her own critical decision. The newly appointed president of Westridge University had extended not just reinstatement with full scholarship, but a formal apology acknowledging the inappropriate actions taken against her. The university proposed establishing a Center for Ethical Corporate Practices named in her honor, with Ayana given significant input on curriculum and research priorities. Like the Hammond Industries offer to Elijah, the proposal represented institutional recognition of her concerns while channeling her advocacy into structures the university could control. The parallel decisions created unexpected distance between them, their different perspectives reflecting fundamental questions about how change occurs. Their meeting at the Community Voice office that evening exposed the growing philosophical divide. "I've spent years understanding Hammond Industries from the inside," Elijah explained, his frustration evident. "I know exactly which testing protocols need changing, which research directions should be prioritized, which executives still need removal. I could implement immediate changes affecting millions of patients, including requirements that all medications be tested across diverse genetic backgrounds." Ayana's response came from equally deep conviction. And what about accountability? Hammond Industries deliberately continued marketing a medication they knew was killing Black patients. "They calculated our lives as acceptable losses. They destroyed your reputation, imprisoned you on false charges, and dismantled my academic career. Now we're supposed to help them avoid the consequences of their actions?" The tension between practical impact and principled accountability created a divide not easily bridged by their shared goals. Both wanted justice for victims and prevention of future discrimination, but their approaches diverged sharply on whether existing institutions could be meaningfully reformed or required fundamental restructuring. Their personal relationship, once strengthened by common struggle, now faced strains as Elijah seriously considered returning to Hammond Industries. Ayana interpreted his willingness to work within the system as potential compromise, while he viewed her rejection of institutional engagement as potentially limiting their impact. The philosophical disagreement might have remained abstract if not for Victor Hammond's final desperate attempt to maintain control. Having lost his corporate position but still controlling substantial personal resources, he returned unexpectedly to the public spotlight with a calculated revelation designed to destroy Elijah's credibility completely. The press conference, hastily arranged at an upscale hotel, drew media attention through promises of explosive new information about the CardioFix controversy. Hammond appeared uncharacteristically disheveled, his usual polish replaced by the intensity of someone with nothing left to lose. "I've remained silent about certain personal matters out of respect for privacy," Hammond began, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity that had served him through decades of corporate leadership. "But given recent events, the public deserves to understand the full context of Elijah Brooks Hamilton's actions." His calculated pause allowed cameras to focus before he continued. 27 years ago, I legally adopted Elijah as part of a philanthropic initiative to provide opportunities for promising youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. The truth, which I've never publicly discussed, is that the adoption was primarily a public relations strategy recommended by our marketing department during a period of unfavorable coverage. He looked directly into the cameras, his expression conveying rehearsed regret. Elijah was selected specifically because his background provided compelling narrative. A bright young Black man from a struggling neighborhood, his mother unable to provide stability. Our corporate communications department crafted the story carefully, presenting me as a benevolent figure while positioning Hammond Industries as socially conscious. Hammond paused again, allowing the manipulation to register with viewers. What I never anticipated was how deeply Elijah would internalize feelings of being used as a publicity tool. His resentment manifested in increasingly erratic behavior, culminating in these elaborate accusations against the company that gave him every advantage. While I take responsibility for my role in creating this situation, the public should understand that the CardioFix controversy stems from personal psychological issues rather than actual corporate misconduct. The revelation combined truth, distortion, and outright lies in ways difficult to immediately disentangle. By acknowledging the adoption's PR motivations, Hammond created an appearance of candor, while simultaneously undermining Elijah's credibility and reframing the entire CardioFix issue as personal vendetta rather than documented discrimination. The strategy targeted not just Elijah's public standing, but his sense of self, attacking the very core of his identity by suggesting his life had been shaped primarily as corporate image management. When video of the press conference reached Elijah and Ayana, his reaction surprised her. Rather than the devastation Hammond clearly intended, Elijah displayed calm resolution that suggested long preparation for this moment. "You knew he would do this," she realized. Elijah nodded slowly. "I've always known Victor would eventually weaponize my childhood. That's why I spent years documenting everything, gathering records, locating witnesses, building evidence of what really happened." His calculated adoption of a black child, while simultaneously developing medications tested primarily on white subjects, perfectly encapsulates the performative inclusion that masks systemic discrimination. The press conference, intended as Hammond's masterstroke, instead became the catalyst that resolved the tension between Elijah and Ayana. Hammond's willingness to publicly destroy someone he had raised, however cynically, demonstrated the fundamental corruption that made institutional reform insufficient. No system that produced and rewarded someone like Victor Hammond could be fixed through incremental change. The personal attack crystallized what had been theoretical. The struggle wasn't simply about specific medications or corporate policies, but about the structures that determined whose lives were valued and whose stories were believed. As media outlets scrambled to investigate Hammond's claims, dividing predictably along racial lines in their framing, Elijah reached his decision. He contacted the Hammond Industries board, declining their offer of reinstatement while proposing an alternative approach that would fundamentally restructure the company rather than simply changing its leadership. Meanwhile, Ayana similarly rejected Westridge University's offer, recognizing that her effectiveness came precisely from her position outside institutional constraints. Their separate decisions, reached independently through different paths, reflected shared recognition that true change required new models rather than reformed versions of systems designed to protect privilege and power. The convergence of their perspectives created renewed partnership based not on romance but on shared purpose, a foundation potentially stronger than their earlier connection. As they developed their response to Hammond's revelation, they recognized that his attempt to destroy Elijah's credibility had inadvertently provided the perfect opportunity to address the broader systems enabling corporate discrimination. By making the conflict explicitly personal, Hammond had opened the door to examining the fundamental relationship between corporate power and racial hierarchy that had created the conditions for CardioFix deaths in the first place. Spring sunlight streamed through tall windows of the community center, where everything had begun 6 months earlier, illuminating a room filled beyond capacity with families, activists, journalists, and community members gathered to witness the formal announcement. At the front, Ayana Jackson stood beside Elijah Brooks Hamilton, both dressed simply but professionally, their expressions reflecting not triumph but purposeful determination. The journey that had brought them to this moment contained more setbacks than victories, more pain than vindication, yet something significant had undeniably been accomplished. Behind them sat rows of people whose lives had been forever altered by CardioFix. Their presence a powerful reminder of the human costs behind clinical statistics and corporate decisions. Ayana stepped forward first, her voice carrying clearly through the packed room. "Thank you all for coming today. We gather to announce the establishment of the Medical Justice Foundation, dedicated to transforming how medications are developed, tested, and distributed across all communities. The foundation represents not just accountability for past harms, but a new model for ensuring such discrimination never happens again. The journey leading here has been difficult, with costs that can never be fully calculated." Elijah joined her at the podium, his presence drawing camera flashes from assembled media. "Hammond Industries no longer exists as you knew it," he stated with quiet authority. Following federal investigations confirming racial discrimination in cardiofix testing and marketing, along with securities violations by former leadership, the company faced existential crisis. Rather than traditional bankruptcy or acquisition, we proposed a different solution. The screens behind them displayed organizational charts showing a completely restructured entity. Effective today, Hammond Industries has been reorganized into a community benefit corporation, with majority ownership transferred to a trust controlled by affected patients and families. The foundation will direct all research activities, with explicit requirements for demographic representation in clinical trials and community oversight of product development. This transformation didn't come easily. In the months following Victor Hammond's desperate press conference, investigators had uncovered additional evidence of discrimination extending far beyond cardiofix. Internal documents revealed systematic underrepresentation of diverse populations in clinical trials across multiple medications, with explicit discussion of cost-saving measures that prioritize testing among demographic groups least likely to experience complications or pursue legal remedies. The Securities and Exchange Commission investigation expanded to include fraud charges against multiple executives, while the Department of Justice opened criminal inquiries into decisions that led directly to hundreds of preventable deaths. These escalating legal challenges created leverage that made the corporate restructuring possible, with major shareholders ultimately preferring orderly reorganization to protracted litigation and potential criminal liability. Victor Hammond himself now faced multiple federal charges, his carefully constructed public image permanently shattered by evidence of his explicit role in decisions that valued certain lives above others. Westridge University had undergone similar transformation following public exposure of its complicity. The Board of Trustees removed Dean Harrington and Professor Whitman, along with several administrators involved in Ayana's unjust expulsion. More significantly, the university established independent oversight for corporate partnerships, with specific protections for students and faculty whose research might challenge donor interests. While these institutional changes represented meaningful progress, both Ayana and Elijah had recognized that their most effective contributions would come from outside traditional structures. Ayana had declined reinstatement at Westridge, instead accepting a position with the National Civil Rights Coalition, where she developed programs addressing racial disparities in healthcare access and outcomes. Her experience became powerful testimony in congressional hearings examining discrimination in medical research, helping shape legislation requiring demographic representation in clinical trials. Elijah had similarly rejected returning to Hammond Industries even in its restructured form, focusing instead on developing the independent medication that had been his secret project during his time living on the streets. The new hypertension treatment, specifically tested across diverse genetic backgrounds to ensure safety for all populations, would be the first product developed through the Foundation's community-centered research model. Together, they had built something that transcended both their initial goals and their personal relationship. What began as individual struggle against specific injustice had evolved into structural reform that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. The Medical Justice Foundation represented new possibilities for how corporations could operate when profit was balanced with human well-being, when diverse voices had genuine authority in decisions affecting their communities. Ayana continued their presentation, explaining the Foundation's three core principles: representation in all research stages, community oversight with real authority, and equitable distribution, ensuring all populations received appropriate treatments. The model explicitly acknowledged historical medical abuses against Black communities while creating practical safeguards against future discrimination. As they outlined specific programs, including a patient advocacy division led by families affected by cardiofix, Ayana recognized how profoundly their journey had transformed her understanding of change itself. The initial vision of justice as punishment or compensation had evolved into something more fundamental: the creation of new systems designed from their inception to value all lives equally. The foundation wasn't simply reacting to past wrongs, but actively building alternatives that made such discrimination structurally impossible. When the formal presentation concluded, community members approached with questions, suggestions, and commitments to involvement. The energy in the room reflected not just approval of their specific plans, but hunger for models that centered community needs rather than corporate priorities. Later, as they walked together through the neighborhood where Elijah had once lived homeless while gathering evidence, Ayana reflected on their journey. "When we started, I thought justice meant making Hammond pay for what they did. Now I understand it means building something better than what we fought against." Elijah nodded, his expression thoughtful. The most powerful response to a broken system isn't just exposing its flaws, but creating alternatives that make its dysfunction obvious by comparison. They had moved beyond their earlier romantic connection, finding partnership based on shared purpose rather than personal attachment. Their relationship had transformed alongside their understanding, evolving into collaboration that honored their different perspectives while maintaining common commitment to fundamental change. The Foundation's work represented just the beginning of longer struggle, but its existence proved something essential: that systems presenting themselves as immutable could indeed be reorganized when enough people recognized their fundamental injustice. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood, Ayana considered how far they had traveled from that first meeting outside the student center. The journey had cost her an academic career, subjected her to institutional retaliation, and forever altered her understanding of justice. Yet standing beside Elijah, watching community members enter the Foundation office to participate in its programs, she recognized that their shared purpose had created possibilities neither could have achieved alone. The transformation wasn't complete. Institutional power remained entrenched. Racial disparities continued throughout healthcare systems, and countless corporations still calculated acceptable losses in marginalized communities. But something significant had shifted in the relationship between power and accountability, creating space for new models centered on equity rather than extraction. What began with a student noticing injustice and refusing to walk past had become something none of them could have imagined at the outset. Not just accountability for specific discrimination, but restructuring of systems designed to perpetuate it. The Foundation stood as living testimony that alternatives were possible, that communities could reclaim power over decisions affecting their lives, that justice sometimes required building new structures rather than simply reforming broken ones. As they prepared for the next phase of their work, Ayana understood that their story would continue evolving beyond this moment, beyond their individual contributions, into something that belonged to all those who recognized injustice and refused to accept its inevitability. Have you ever witnessed discrimination but been afraid to speak up? The consequences Ayana faced for standing against injustice show how systems protect themselves, but her persistence ultimately created change far beyond what she initially imagined. Our society still struggles with racial disparities in healthcare, education, and economic opportunity. What new models might we build together, rather than simply reforming broken systems? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might find inspiration in this journey from individual resistance to collective transformation. Thank you for joining us in examining how justice sometimes requires reimagining what's possible rather than accepting what exists. May we all find the courage to recognize injustice when we encounter it, and the vision to build alternatives that value every life equally.